Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When the Pharisees, with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around Jesus, they observed that some of his disciples ate their meals with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews, do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed. The purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds. So the Pharisees and the scribes questioned him. Why do your disciples not follow the tradition of the elders, but instead eat a meal with unclean hands? He responded, well, did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine human precepts. You disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition. He summoned the crowd again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that enters one from outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile. From within people, from their hearts, come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, ignorance, and folly. All these evils come from within, and they defile. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
With faculty and students preparing to return to school next week, I'd like to share with you a little school memory of mine. One of the things that I dreaded when I was going to grade school was the threat of what was known as the dreaded pop quiz. It was a surprise test that a teacher would throw at the class to see if we'd done the previously assigned readings or written assignments, and also to see if we understood the material taught up to that point. Now, I usually made sure that I had my homework done, but there were a few times when I didn't get it done. And sometimes I lucked out. No pop quiz, no collecting of homework. Other times I was not so lucky. I bring this up because the Pharisees and scribes in a number of places in the Gospels, in particular this passage from Mark, give pop quizzes to Jesus, their own version of it. Now, according to these Jewish leaders who are well-versed in Holy Scripture and Jewish law, following the Jewish rituals and laws was supposed to be proof of a strong relationship with God and the faith community. And their testing Jesus here was in the hopes of exposing Jesus as a fake for not following their idea of the rules of God, hoping to show all the people that Jesus was not really from God, but merely disrupting the faith community for his own selfish ends. So they challenge him on various laws and rules, such as purifying one's hands before eating. Now, by the way, that ritual of purifying hands was done not only for physical reasons, but for spiritual ones. For example, did you know that if a Jew touched a non-Jew, or touched something a non-Jew touched during the course of their daily work and travels, or if they touched a dead body, or an animal that was considered unclean by the Jews, such as a pig, then that Jew was considered to be ritually unclean, and thus not allowed to participate in the Jewish liturgy for fear of great offense to God and the faith community. Now that person would have to go through a series of rituals to become clean again and then rejoin the community at liturgy and prayer. Now it's interesting to note that instead of these Jewish leaders exposing Jesus as a fake for not following their laws, Jesus actually turns the tables on them and actually exposes them as being the fakes and phonies, of being hypocrites or mere play actors. They seem to be more interested in looking holy and righteous than actually being holy and righteous. They certainly don't seem to have a heart full of love for God and neighbor in their attitudes and actions. So I think this is an important point here, that for Jesus, it's not merely about following the rules, as much as where is your heart behind where the rules came in the first place. Recall Jesus' own words from John 15, and I quote, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Right? So observing religious rules is meant really to draw us closer to God and our neighbor, so that we hopefully die more to ourselves and live more for others. And it's not meant to make us think that we are actually better than other people, which is how the Pharisees looked at it. For example, I like to think that you came to Mass this weekend and hopefully come every Sunday, not because the church says so, or because you like the music or the sermons, although that would be nice, or we'll go to hell if we don't attend, or just to score brownie points with God and look good in other people's eyes. Hopefully we come each and every Sunday because we sense Jesus calling us to be here. And we want to offer our thanks to God for all the blessings that we have in our life. Isn't God worthy of coming each and every week to give thanks for? And when we're here, what does He do for us? Our being here allows us to be strengthened by the power of prayer and community, being nourished by His holy words of Scripture, and receiving Jesus' actual presence at this altar, His body and blood, which you're not going to find anywhere else except the Mass. All of that is to help us to live more honestly, more openly, and more generously in that spirit of love that Jesus intended for us as we go about our daily duties during the week, whether it's at work or at home or school or wherever. If we say we love and believe in Jesus, and we do religious things like praying or going to Mass, and then we turn around and purposely hurt someone through anger or our impatience or prejudice or rudeness or just cold, selfish attitudes, then that becomes the same kind of hypocrisy that Jesus is accusing these Jewish leaders of. We'll be in the same boat. So all of today's readings remind us of the importance of that big word that we know as integrity, of living up to the values that we say we cherish, of having our hearts and minds in the right place so that all of our words and actions flow naturally from them. In the course of our everyday business, as we go from place to place and person to person, God is giving us countless pop quizzes, basically asking us in a variety of ways, hey, do you really love me? Are you really on board with me? If so, show me through how you show your love to other people. You recall in John's Gospel at the very end when the risen Jesus is talking to Peter, and he gives him a pop quiz. It's kind of a make-up exam for the fact that Peter denied knowing him 3 times when he was on trial. And what does Jesus ask him? Peter, do you love me? And he asks him that, looking right at him. And what does Peter say in response each time? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. And then Jesus replies in a similar way 3 times to reinforce the point. If you love me, then feed my sheep. Take care of these people I've entrusted to you. Give good example. Show that you care. That's how we follow Jesus' law of love. And you know, when we make right choices, we can inspire countless others to make better choices for God. Case in point. I read a book a while ago written by a Catholic youth minister by the name of Mark Hart, who relayed this story about a time when he was in the checkout line in the grocery store a few years ago. And as Mark went to pay for his groceries, the young man who was the cashier handed him his change. And as Mark headed out through the doors with his bags of groceries in hand, he noticed that the cashier gave him $1 change too much. And at first, Mark thought, well, what's the big deal? It's only $1. It's not going to bankrupt the store. It'll somehow all even out in the cash register. And yet, Mark decided to turn around and go back to the cashier, who was already in the middle of another transaction. And Mark interrupted the young man and said, "You accidentally gave me too much change. Here's that extra $1 back." Now, Mark did not expect the reply that he got from the cashier. The young cashier said, and I quote, "It wasn't an accident. I recognized you from your church. A friend invited me to your program last week, and I heard you speak about honesty and integrity. So I gave you too much on purpose and watched to see what you do. I told myself, if you came back, I'd go back to that church. But if you didn't, then you'd be just like all those other so-called church people who were full of it in the past." End quote. I hate to ask him what the full of it was. And you know, Mark smiled, gave him the $1 back, thanked him for holding him accountable, and told him that he looked forward to seeing him at his church the following Sunday. And the young man agreed. And sure enough, the young cashier was in church that next Sunday, right in the front row. Aren't you lucky to be in the front row this morning? As Mark Hart writes, and I quote from his book, "In God's grocery store, it doesn't matter what you look like on paper. He knows who's real and who is plastic." End quote. So prepare well, folks, for your next pop quiz, whenever it may come upon you. And always be ready to graduate to the next level.